Hey there, welcome to the House Music Connection podcast. I'm your host, Tony Fuel. Each week, I have a conversation with a different artist where we discuss personal stories, challenges, successes, production process, and more. Ultimately, the goal is for all of us to feel a greater sense of connection to the house music community and to one another. So let's get right into the conversation. Hey there, Jonathan. Welcome to the podcast. In this episode, we're talking with Jonathan Camargo. Please correct me if I said your name wrong. But
You got it.
Jonathan runs the Rhythm Republic channel on YouTube and maybe some other places. We'll talk about that. And I wanted to bring Jonathan on the podcast because he's developed this channel specifically for house music, deep house, authentic house music, and he's done that with without kind of having a face on the channel and whatnot. And so. But he's got really good branding and really good, amazing graphics, and he's built this channel 100% organically by delivering a good product. And I just wanted to get his perspective on why he started the channel, and then also just kind of we'll just kind of riff about house music in general and the scene and what the scene has become, and we'll just get into the conversation.
For sure. Thank you, Tony, for having me on here. I'm super excited to just kind of chat about house music, culture, just in general, everything across the board. So, and just for everyone, I'm Jonathan Camargo. I run the Rhythm Republic YouTube channel. I do all the, the mixes and all the brand design and the design for, pretty much all of it, and all the concepts, and all that stuff too. And my wife also, we also work together on coming up with some ideas and just kind of riffing about, how to do fresh stuff pretty much and try to keep it all connected together. So thank you for having me, Tony. I really appreciate that. And it's just dope to see how the house music, culture just keeps everything connected in a way. And it's kind of trippy sometimes because you never know. My wife always tells me, she's like, oh, you never know who's listening or who's kind of checking it out. So
That's true.
When I make the mixes, I really don't think about that. I just kind of was like, I make mixes and I just want to upload them and just share them with people, just for the sake of sharing some great house music. And it's super cool to see, that it's such a global thing as well too. That I really feel like it's powerful, because sometimes when you think house music, it's just the U.S., but I know it's like I've learned that it's become. And it always has been a global thing, but in the U.S. it seems to be more of a regional kind of thing, but it's definitely a global audience, which is amazing, because you have people from, speak different languages, but you put that 4/4 beat, and it's just like it becomes this universal language, which is really cool, So that's what I think I really enjoy the most. It's just kind of doing that, So
Yeah, awesome. So, where did your journey with house music begin? And by the way, I think it's probably worth mentioning that you live in Los Angeles and you've
for sure
been there for a while. So, yeah.
So I was born and raised in LA, and house music for me really started, I would say, in the early '90s. As probably most people, out here in LA. I think it was Power 106 used to play a lot of house music. Everything from the Crystal Waters to Robin S. to Black Box to CNC Music Factory, CC Peniston, all that stuff. Was played on the radio, and that's where I really I used to be like a young kid, maybe like, I don't know, like 10 plus years old, 11, just listen, like, what is this? Like it just had this kind of, the sound was so fresh and new and timeless. It's something new that we really didn't hear. And I was like, what is this? So we just kind of gravitated towards that sound, especially the deep house. Cause I think at one point, that's the phrase that was, at that point, the phrase that was kind of coined for that type of house music. And this is I had never heard of like Larry Heard or, Can You Feel It and all that stuff, so I'm sure all that was influenced by that. So, I think that was that's where my journey started. And then really, I would say more within the early 90s. That's where I really got too interested in DJing because, coincidentally, I think in the early 90s I had watched the what was in the movie with Tupac? Oh, Juice, I think it was.
Mm.
Right. So, or his friend, he's like a DJ, he's doing these trials. And the thing is, I had never seen, because when you listen to radio, you hear DJs mixing. You don't know what they're doing, right? You're just listening to it. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, it kind of struck me as like, oh, wow, this is so like cool. He's taking one record and then with this console in the center, mixing it and then taking it into the other record. I was like, I had never really seen it. So, which it was really cool. So it just kind of sparked my interest. So kind of fast forward to a little more of the mid 90s. I was going to middle school and, a bunch of kids had these kind of like mixtapes. And I was like, what is this stuff? It's a little bit, they were a little older. And I was just like, man, all this stuff. And that's where I think I might have heard a lot of the JD Plastic Dreams and what was it? Just another bunch of other stuff that it's crazy because at that time, I don't even remember the names of the songs because you would just get a tape and it was just like, you'd play it through. It was just like Deep House Mix or, and you would know. And to this day now, I'm still discovering some of these tracks. I'm just like, holy crap. Like it's one of those full circle moments that are just like, wow, like I didn't know what the name was back then, but then I'm like, oh, wow. It's like, I think, have you ever heard of this track called Producer Pancake? I think it's Pancake, Don't Turn Your Back on Me. But I just now discovered that those kind of older songs. And I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy how through discovery, I think I might even stumbled across it on YouTube, man. And it's just like, it's pretty insane how those songs really stand the test of time where it's like you listen to it, it's like, it still sounds fresh and new, which is super cool. So that's what I think really attracted me to house music too, that just like you listen to the stuff from now from the 90s and it still sounds fresh and new and, which is really cool. So I would say around the mid to later 90s when I started going to high school in LA, I used to go to Melrose. Melrose was just kind of this area where it was just like really hip and cool. They used to have a bunch of record stores. Yeah. There was Beat Non-Stop. There was DMC. There were Street Sounds where eventually I started working there when I was a little older, when I was already in high school. But I used to just kind of just go to these record stores on the weekend sometimes and just take the bus down there and just walk in the record stores and just go in, grab the records off the shelves and just listen to them. And then, I would see a bunch of DJs just kind of, it's probably like, Friday or Saturday. Sometimes they're just going in there buying stuff, they're going to go buy to go play stuff. And I'm just sitting there, just grabbing stuff off the wall, playing, putting my headphones on, listening to them, just kind of jamming out, because that was sometimes that was the only way you can kind of consume house music, because if you were to go to other like Virgin or I think at that time it was like Sam Goody and it was just, you go to the listening station, but you go to a record store, you get the full experience where it's like, oh, you grab the album, you see the album, you see the label art, you see the production credits, which is really cool to me because I was like, oh, this, that's when I really started picking up on stuff like that, where it's like production credit and kind of reading, who produced this and who's vocals and stuff like that, which is really cool. Because a lot of times, as a consumer, you listen to, you don't know any stuff, you know what I mean? So it was definitely cool kind of learning about that. And I would say once I would just go to all the record stores, go from one, Beat Non-Stop, go to DMC, check out that one, and then go to Street Sounds, that was on the second floor, I think at that time, around the mid 90s. And then sometimes I would also go to the store, this other record store in on Santa Monica Boulevard, but it was still close to Melrose, called Prime Cuts. So I would just kind of frequent those and just, just check out what was new. And at that time too, I couldn't buy vinyl because I didn't have a turntable, but I was like, I had the knack. I was like, oh, I want to get a turntable and stuff like that. Right. So, I would say around that time to a little around mid 90s, because I started high school in like 96. So I would go to Street Town sometimes after work because it was literally across the street from my high school. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, so my high school was on Melrose and Fairfax. So it was literally once I started high school, I would just go to all the record stores sometimes after, and I would frequent Street Sounds. I would just go in there and listen to house records or hip hop records, and then some of the guys there, they noticed I would just kind of frequent, and then there was, hey man, dudes, like I think it was the owner. Do you want to come work with us, or do you know, or just he just asked me out of the blue. I was like, sure, yeah. I was like, come. He's like, come on Sundays, and I'll give you, you can work here. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah. He's good. So I was like, I think this might be like 97, 98 possibly. So,
Nice.
and the crazy thing is like I started working there, and there's a lot of cool DJs who worked there at the time. I think Christopher Lawrence used to work there at some point. Mark Lewis. I think even Marcus Wyatt used to work there, but several years before. I think earlier mid 90s. Wow. This was closer to later. And even the owner too, his name is Bob Baga. He used to hold these kind of like DJ school on Sundays where he'd show people how to beat match and blend and mix records and show you how to comp bars and music structure and stuff like that, which is really cool. So I was there Sundays just kind of picking up on stuff as I was working, and you see there was a lot of action coming on, different DJs. And I was just, mind you, I'm like 16, 17. These are all like 20 somethings, so I'm just like, it was a really cool time. I would say the 90s is a very special time, for sure. That, so. But I would say that
house's golden age. Yeah.
Oh yeah. 100%. And for me that's where it all started. LA, I think definitely had a very cool kind of journey with house music, but I would say towards the 90s, the late 90s, it started becoming this like really, it was like it went from like the core of house music in the 90s, the more deep house stuff in the mid 90s, and towards the late 90s, it became like this hard house scene. And it was just like, what is this, And it was more, and there was some hard house that was dope from Chicago. And a lot of that's where, a lot of it where it came from. But there was some stuff that was just like, it was bad. It was just like really off key and just like 136 BPMs. It was like, so at that point I was like, what is this? So I really kind of shifted more into like listening to more like hip hop and just, I would say the jazzier, more underground stuff, but at the same time, I learned how to mix, at the record store. The owner who taught me, like, here's how you take one record, transition, learning how to beat match and counting the song, the bars. So, and that's where it all started. So around, I would say the later 90s, that's when I started kind of getting into more hip hop, just like the more underground stuff. But but it's like, I learned how to mix house music, traditionally from records, and kind of like, which was really cool because it's definitely a challenge. People think it's easy. It's like, no, someone, when you're mixing records, it's definitely, you're multitasking, because it's like you're playing a record, you're figuring out the next one, you're listening at the volume and the EQ, and then as you're transitioning, you might have to, brush the platter or adjust the pitch or, because you always have those kind of, shifts in the timing or that kind of like swing in some records. So, and I remember clearly too, Bob, he used to show us, he would play two records at the exact same time. And he would say, these records, they're never gonna, hit on the one. They are going to hit on the one, but there always is going to be that kind of like shift in the timing because each record, each turntable is calibrated. They're not all calibrated the same. So there's going to be that wow and flutter where it's like, you're always going to have to account for that, when you ride the pitch a little bit or just hit the brush or the platter, stuff like that. So,
so it sounds like your journey kind of like started from the music, for sure, from just hearing the music. Because some people's journeys, they start as a kid. They start from being in the clubs first, but it sounds like your journey started from being in the record stores and just so hearing that music on the radio, then going to the record stores, seeking out that music. Did you ever, I guess, start going to clubs, or has it always been kind of a retail or like a consumer experience for you?
You know what's it's crazy. I didn't start going to any of the clubs until like in my I would say early 20s, but by that time I started kind of DJing at this kind of, it was like a bar club in Hollywood called Star Shoes, but it was mostly like, it was kind of like funk, soul, little hip hop, some neo soul stuff. And it was more of like just not necessarily a club, but it was like more of it was like a lounge, but kind of people would dance, you know, which was cool. But I really didn't get the full kind of house music experience in a club setting because I was still young around that time. But then after, I would say the 2000s, 2004 or 5, I think I moved to Vegas. So around that time, it was, you know, there wasn't really much house music in Vegas. You know, it was just mostly hip hop, you know, top 40 stuff, and all the stuff was kind of cringy. But I did get to experience, I would say one of the most memorable experience I had in Vegas was if you ever had the chance to go to Dre's, when they had it in the basement, man.
After
I
hours,
think that after hours club, man, I stumbled across that place just out of like, I don't know if a friend or somebody, I don't remember how, or promoter that I knew at the time, I'm not quite sure. But man, those guys, that place was just an experience, because you would go down the elevator, you know, as you're going down the elevator and about to walk out of the elevator, you hear the 4th floor thump. And man, it was just like such an experience. They would play just top notch.
So
just top notch.
Yeah, you moved to Vegas like right after I left, because I was there from like 99 to 2004. And I kind of experienced that whole transition where, I don't know, every club was playing house music or dance music. It was either house or trance or like you know, somewhere in between. And sometimes breaks or whatever, but is house or trance. And I mean, it's all like that, more like popular commercialized house music.
Yeah.
It's still good music. I mean, like that Madison Avenue, the Don't Call Me Baby, that record was like really popular at that time, you know. That's, you know, that kind of music, you know, that genre or like that lane of house music. And it was so interesting how just overnight the clubs just transitioned from house to hip hop, and then that's all it was just hip hop, and nobody was into house music anymore in Vegas, and except for at Dre's After Hours, and then there's another party series called Soul Kitchen Las Vegas, and
I think I might have heard of them. Because I did do a couple,
throw some parties every once in a while still. So
I did do a couple gigs in Vegas here and there. Just played hip hop and other, I think, some of it was a little more top 40 stuff. But then the DJing scene, I was just, man, it was just too oversaturated in a lot of places, and a lot of things that I didn't like. I was like, man, I really don't want to play this. You know what I mean? So, and then the thing was, this challenge is like the stuff you do want to play, there's not really much of an audience for it. So at that time, you know, in Vegas, I would just listen to a lot of compilations, you know, a lot of mixed compilations. And and that's how I really discovered or rediscovered a lot of the mixes, you know. So I would listen to a lot of that. I was still listening to house music, but it was more in the form of like, you know, VA compilation and stuff like that. But I would say Dre's was one of those experiences that it was just, man, that place was it was magical, man. Like even the sound system, you'd walk in there. I think the DJ, I forget who his name was, Chris, might have been Chris DeJesus or something like that, because I would see him in different clubs. Because, you know, being in the scene, you would meet other DJs and promoters, and hey, man, you know, come by and this and that. So, but man, they would play so much good stuff. Because, you know, around that time, they were still playing, I mean, even the more underground stuff that people wouldn't hear of, that like, oh man, what track is this? This is dope. Like, you know, but you know how the big clubs in Vegas, they just run through a format, run through the same programming. And no one gets to really hear the really good stuff. So it was almost like a treat, you know? It was like, oh, like, So it was, I think that was probably one of the most memorable club experiences I've had. And the thing is too, you know, how Dre's was, it wasn't like this, all just go buy bottle service and sit at the tables. It was just a huge kind of like basement. But obviously they had their tables and people would buy bottle service, but people would just go there to dance, you know, which was really cool. Now it's just like, it's a whole different beast, but
yeah, I haven't been there in a while, so long.
Yeah,
it's not my vibe anymore. Like I'm old now. I've got like, you know, family and everything, and
yeah, for sure. Same.
I mean, if there's a good lounge that kind of starts a little bit earlier and ends a little bit earlier, that's my vibe. I'm there for that. I'm here for it all day long. But and then of course, like in the lounge, you're gonna hear a lot more of that, like that loungy style, of deeper style with the more jazz influences and soul and whatnot. So yeah.
So it's funny you say, because a lot of that sparked kind of like, for me, the interest was, I used to listen to a lot of VA compilations, you know, like all the naked music compilations. I think this was still, because in the mid 2000s, I was a little late to kind of grasp onto those, because those were out in the early 2000s, late 90s. Yeah. And the crazy thing is, like, when I used to work at the record store, I would see some of Miguel Miggs' stuff when he was putting out stuff through Transport. But the weird thing is, like, I never stumbled across these mixes. It wasn't until like mid 2000s where I just kind of started stumbling across it from like looking artists up. And, you know, I used to have this one mix that I used to listen to religiously in the car. It was by this DJ named Parker Jones, I think his name was. And it was, man, this mix is like so epic. It was like, I'll send it to you after, but it was just one of those mixes that you can just put from the beginning and listen to the end. And it was just one of those mixes that it would just make you feel good, and, you know, it was uplifting and just kind of get you going for the day. You know, it was like the hit. I wouldn't say hit after hit, but just the soulful, deep tracks, one right after the other, just kind of hit you, and just like, man, it'd give you, you know, it uplift you. So that's where I think too, parts of that I try to incorporate in the channel, in the Rhythm Republic, and the mixes, because, you know, I want that kind of listening experience for people to kind of experience, like the listening experience, because, you know, house music, I feel too, is dance, and, you know, it's also a listening experience too, where, you know, you're at home lounging, chilling, you know, playing something in the back. So
the dancing part doesn't really even go away, because even if I'm at a lounge, I'm sitting in my chair having a conversation with somebody, there's deep house playing in the background, I'm still tapping my foot. You're still kind of
bobbing
my head, kind of like rolling, you know, my shoulders a little bit, and be like, okay, I like this, I dig this, while I'm having a conversation. So we're still kind of dancing in our chairs, on some
which level. Is cool.
So,
the ambiance, it creates this cool kind of ambiance, and that's what I used to like about at that time, where, because, you know, in the clubs in Vegas, it's just like top 40, and sometimes radio play. So at that time, I think I had a bunch of mix CDs, and then I think I would just look through. There was this record store, I think, in Vegas that I used to go to, funny enough, called Hip Hop Site. I think it was Hip Hop Site.
Over on Maryland Parkway, kind of by UNLV.
Yes, sort of. Across the street. Across the street from UNLV. And I would go there sometimes to find like CDs and other stuff. And the crazy thing, I found a bunch of cool records there too. Some kind of like, because I like finding kind of like rare remix records and stuff like that, are just kind of fly under the radar or stuff like that. So, so I used to listen to a lot of that stuff while I was in Vegas too, but I still listen to hip hop, you know. But parts of the Rhythm Republic, the channel, stem from that. Is like, how do I, you know, that listening experience? You know, it's like I want to incorporate that, and definitely a lot of those mixes, because, you know, a lot of times I've noticed too, it's like in your car, you just pop that in. Like, you don't want any noise. You don't want commercials. You don't want any of the voiceover DJs. You just want to listen to music. And I feel like I want to provide that experience too on the channel, where it's like, even though, you know, YouTube sticks its ads in there, but, you know, most of the time I think that listening experience part is definitely part of the whole house music culture. So.
Yeah. So we're kind of like transitioning naturally over to like talking about Rhythm Republic a little bit more. How did that start? I mean, you kind of started alluding, you've already alluded to that a little bit, but I
Yeah.
guess how did that come about as a concept? And, you know, what made you decide to start just, you know, just executing on that vision, if you will?
I would say that was around 2019. And mind you,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of not got away from DJ, but I just kind of shifted away from it a little bit. Even though
Mm-hmm.
I still have my turntables, I still have my
Yeah.
records. I had stopped doing it for a while, and it's just because I feel like too the market was so oversaturated. I was like, I'm just focused on my career, focus on my
Mm-hmm.
job, and just listen to music, And one day I was just like, man, like I was just looking at my records, looking at my stuff. I was like, I should try to do something with a little more with it, but it's like I didn't know exactly what to do, And I remember in high school I used to make mixtapes.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly it was like hip hop mixtapes, and I should just either hand them out, sometimes sell them here and there, nothing too crazy. But I enjoyed kind of like, finding music, putting them in a mix, and just giving it, giving it out or selling them or putting, a mix CD or whatever,
Mm-hmm. Sharing that love for
So
the music. Yeah.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, or or just be like, hey, you gotta check out this artist or check out this producer. He has some really good
Yeah.
stuff, that kind of thing. And a lot of that too stemmed from high school because when I used to go to high school, I used to get sometimes promos from the record store and just check this out. This is really good
Yeah.
stuff. And then people, oh yeah, man, thanks. So a lot of that, I said, Rhythm Republic stemmed from those kind of small interactions and those experiences, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. And then I would say around 2019, I was like, man, I want to do something with mixes, right? I was like, I want to create some kind of catalog of mixes that I've always wanted to create, right?
Mm-hmm.
With specifically with house music. Cause I was like, man, there's just so much dope house music that needs to get showcased in some kind of way that
Yeah.
needs to get out there, And a lot of the inspiration came too from how I said those 2000s, late 90s, 2000s compilations. Cause I used to listen to those. I'm like, how do I put mixes in a format where it's one, very interesting, it's consumable, it doesn't drag, and it's to the point where it's like, oh, I want to listen to the next one. I'll find a good format too, where it's like, I want to find the next one, listen to the next one. So that's where it really all stemmed from. So around, I would say October or like 2019, I was like, oh, I'm going to start a channel. I started thinking of names. And then my wife and I
Mm-hmm.
would bounce ideas, and then I just landed on Rhythm Republic. I'm like, well, rhythm. I was thinking, I'm like, oh, rhythm, like that's an important factor of house music,
Mm-hmm.
music in general, right? Rhythm, the drums, that kind of thing, and obviously
Mm-hmm.
house music. The drums are the foundation of all of it.
The
That kick,
drums and the
the
bass and
hi
all
hat,
that whole
yeah.
groove. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so rhythm and all that stems from that you essentially creates a rhythm, So I was like, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
and then somehow just Republic stuck in my head, or just because it
Mm-hmm.
rolled, and I was like, oh, Republic means a body of people, and so I'm like, oh, it kind of has a good ring to it, so I just kind of created a look online. No one really had it, I think, at that time. Someone had it as a patent or something, or as a trademark, and it was a dead trademark for something. And I was like, well, I'm
Mm.
gonna just run with it. So I created a
Yeah.
logo. And at that time too, I had a friend in New York that he kind of played like tech house, and my brother too. He was into the soulful stuff. So I'm like, oh wow, and
Mm.
it kind of connected because I'm like, oh, we have a little bit of everything. And I love the deep house and the more soulful stuff too. So I'm like, then we have a little bit of everything. The channel has started, so I'm like, let's just start making mixes, and
Mm.
it started from there. So each of us had like a specific kind of category of, okay, you'll do soulful house, you do tech, I'll do the deep stuff. So you had a little bit of variety, which was cool. So.
Mm-hmm.
But then too, when I started creating mixes, my equipment was in a hall where it needed to be, and I started making recording mixes, and I started improving my process too on mixes. Because before, when I would create mixes, I would just go off of muscle memory. Oh, this
Mm.
song, this song, this song. So I started writing stuff down. So I'm like, okay, this song here, this song
Yeah.
there. I'm going to put this song in the middle, this one towards the end. Because I wanted to create kind of like a journey and kind of like an experience with the mixes. So, but that's how it started. And I just kind of kept improving on that whole process, compiling tracks, creating, like after I've compiled tracks, I create like, write down playlists and just kind of improve on that. But then the mixing part, I try to really improve on the timing, because when I started too, I was still using my turntables, and mind you, I hadn't used them in so long, and obviously the pitch was off, the calibration was off twat. So I had to take them. There's this guy here in Orange County that he calibrates. So I had my 20+-year-old turntables are just dusty and just like in need of service. The tone arm was all. I was like, man, I totally neglected these, and that's why I started listening to my mixes. I can hear the sudden kind of flutter in the turntable. So when I would record, I would hear that. I was like, oh my God, like, how am I going to put this stuff out? This is horrible. So I would compare, I would try to really compare the stuff that I was doing to a lot of the, the stuff from the late 90s, 2000s. Like, I was like, man, I don't think I'm going to ever get on this level, So it was a little discouraging, but then it clicked on my brain. I said, well, I need to really maybe get some newer equipment, because I still had my Vestax, my 2-channel mixer with it was a battle style, hip hop, kind of setup, DJ setup. So
I have a suspicion though that a lot of the mixes that are like made it out on CD, a lot of those are probably studio mixes. If I had to guess, they're just
right, and edited.
They're live, totally
edited on a 4-track or one of those things. So, and that's how I used to listen to. I was like, man, these transitions are just freaking perfect, and the timing was perfect. So so just kind of fast forward, so I started improving my equipment. I got my turntables kind of tuned up and calibrated and get all that, and then I got to kind of readjusting my, I would say, setup to be more of a house style kind of setup. So I ended up buying a controller. I still use my laptop, the Serato, but I use it in the format of like a traditional kind of house DJ. So I really started tweaking that a little more, and then really kind of improving on the mixing part, like the timing. Because, with vinyl, either the records and know when the changes and transitions come, or when the drums drop, or not the drums, but like the synths and all that constant wind down at the end. Then it's like, okay, that's where your opportunity is to kind of start queuing up and then just start making those transitions. So, with the controller, and obviously the thing with the newer technology, the CDJs, you can see the timing, right? You can see when you're about to run out. With vinyl, you can't really see that. So you would either know the record, or when you mix, you have to keep an eye on the timing. So what the new stuff allowed me to do was really improve on the timing of the mixes too. It's like, okay, this song's about to run out, but then I kept improving on that. So every time I created a new mix, I could hear, I was like, okay, because I like to mix. When I mix on the one, it's like a long form mix, but I try to break it down into little sections where it's like the 20 seconds, you're queuing it up. The other 20 seconds, you're kind of building it up. And then the last 20 seconds, you're kind of exiting the mix, you know what I mean? And then from there, you're already in the other song. So, but that's how it kind of really started. So then after, the pandemic kind of rolled around, and that really amplified that, because we had nothing but time. Everyone's at home. And around that time too, I had some of these records. And mind you too, I had some of the house records, like some of the Naked stuff, just a variety of different. So Amoeba, around the early, like 2012, this is pre-pandemic, I had gone to Amoeba, and I'm sure you've been there, and I always frequent the used bin section, right? And man, you would find some gems in those used bins that I was surprised. I literally found maybe like 50% of what I have in those used bins. Literally, I would go from one bin, I'd find like the Blue Six Music and Wine. And then I was like, okay, I'm taking this. I went to the next bin, and it's like Beautiful Tomorrow album. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, let me take that. Lisa
Yeah.
Shaw.
Yeah.
One day I just walked in there. It was just this kind of, I don't know what it was, destiny or luck, but I've had found those records and they were all there. And I was just like, dude, who sold all these records to Amoeba? And mind you, there was a lot of other ones. I just went in there and just grabbed all of them. And mind you, I had this stash of records. So during the pandemic, I just started listening to them again. I was playing for my wife because she loves house music too. So I would just play them at home while we were listening to it. I'm like, oh man, I need to make a mix of all this stuff. Like, because I know there's some stuff on YouTube floating around. So I remember I was thinking to myself, well, I'm like, okay, so YouTube, there's all these mixes, right? But they're just floating around area. And there's not one channel that has like, okay, a back-to-back kind of catalog of like mixes. So I was like, okay, I had these records. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this mix for the Naked Music mix or whatever, but different from all the other ones, you know?
Yeah.
So, and that's how it kind of all started. Just I would say the pandemic really fueled that, where it's just I had nothing but time. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to start making this kind of mix, you know, where it's like themed, you know, it's like a Naked Music mix, you know, those kind of things. So that's how it kind of really started with the mixes, you know, and just kind of improving. I would listen to some of my older, I was like, man, this is horrible. But a lot of people like, oh, this is great. And I was like, which is really cool, you know, to see when you share stuff online, you get a lot of feedback from people, not even just in the US, but across the globe. People really embrace it with open arms, which is really cool. And I think it really fuels part of it too. You know, it's motivating to see people really enjoy listening and connect with it. Now, how I said, not just from the dance perspective, but listening to it, I think also has a more profound effect on people because
Absolutely,
lyrics,
for sure.
So,
well, and the thing is, like, I mean, a lot of us who experienced that, you know, in the '90s or whatever, the late, you know, especially that deep house sound in the late '90s, early 2000s,
yes,
we are getting to that age where we're not maybe taking anything into our bodies like that we might have at one point in time, you know, or whatever, and now we're just getting to experience it the way that it was, you know, from a completely different perspective than maybe we might have, you know, the 25 years ago. So, and we get to experience it in our natural state and kind of really truly appreciate what it's doing for us and for our spirit, you know, not just our bodies, but our spirit too. So,
and that's what you said right there is super important, because a lot of that, when I started playing these records at home with my wife and we were just listening, I was like, man, this is like, you relive those moments. You know, certain songs have certain meanings in certain times of your life, you know, whether you were like, yeah, you heard it in the club, or maybe you were going through something, you know, at a specific time that maybe just helped you. So a lot of that, I said, those things, I was just like, man, I need to put this all, you know, in some kind of format or a mix that people would just play it, just let us like relive certain moments, stuff like that. So that's why in those mixes, I try to pick out like certain tracks that are just like the classics, or certain tracks too that maybe flew under the radar, that are just like, oh man, I've never heard that, or even just a remix of a certain track. You know, I really enjoy those, you know, because those certain remixes, like I'm a big fan of listening to the different versions and interpretations of how producers say, I would have produced this track like this, you know. And some remixes are obviously better than the originals, you know. So
that's true.
It's a cool, I think part of that too, that whole remix is really cool to experience too. Because then, for example, a lot of that happened with my wife and I, because she would, like, for example, you remember Shakedown, right? Shakedown. Man, what is this song name? But At Night, Shakedown, right? So there was the Kid Cream remix that was like the most popular one. And then I remember I played it. She was like, oh, this is the original version. I was like, no, that's a remix of this version. But my favorite version was the I think the Thai Soul version. Jask, I think, produced that one. And it just has more of this moodier, deeper kind of soulful vibe. But the Kid Cream remix had this like really club vibe. But it's just really cool to see the contrast of how a producer can take one track and interpret it into a different kind of emotion or a different vibe. And it's really cool. But the cool thing is like how I said back to how house music, it could be very regional. Somebody could have heard this remix somewhere else and someone heard the other remix somewhere else and think that's the original song. Yeah. And then you come together. It's like, oh, this is not the original. It's the remix and this is a remix. So it was just kind of an experience. So cool.
Well, even with Robin S., the Show Me Love, like the version that we hear that we're all familiar with, you know, like that Stonebridge mix or whatever it is, it's not the original. I mean, if you go back to like, you know, 2 or 3 years, I think it's like originally released 3 years before that, and then it didn't really do anything. But then the remix is what really kind of gave it a life.
That life, the legs, It's kind of a trip, with this whole remix. But I really like that, though. It's just, and I try to incorporate too a lot of those remixes in the mixes that I do, because, or even like dubs. I love like certain dubs of certain tracks, you know, or certain, other versions or certain tracks that I'm just like, you haven't heard, or like, oh damn, that's a good one, you know. And you can hear it too in the first like 15 seconds. If those drums don't hit or you don't feel that kind of, I'm like, this, when you hear it, it's like, oh, that's going to be a good one, you know? So I'm really big on that too, with like the drums and the bass lines and the vocals. And, you know, if it doesn't grab me with those first 15, 20 seconds, I'm like, it's just, it tends to be not too good. Yeah. So,
yeah. So, so you've got a lot of presence on YouTube. Are you? Is Rhythm Republic also on SoundCloud and Mixcloud?
No, actually, no. When we started was strictly for YouTube, because I noticed. Because here's the thing with the Mixcloud and SoundCloud, I noticed because I bounced around this. So I was like, oh, where should I start? Because I did my research. I was like, well. You know, I remember people talking about YouTube saying, oh, YouTube's not that good. And then Mixcloud is where to go, and SoundCloud. So I just finally decided I'm going to go with YouTube, because the thing that I found with YouTube was the reach, right? There was a lot more reach in YouTube.
For sure.
Whereas Mixcloud and SoundCloud, I feel like it's a lot more closed in terms of reach. You know, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I felt like...
It absolutely makes sense, yeah. I mean, because
it has a lot more reach, you know.
I mean, YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world, and I don't know, Google, who owns YouTube, knows exactly what they're doing. They have their algorithm is tailored to give you what you want, you know. Whereas Mixcloud isn't necessarily going to do that, and so it's you kind of have to either already know the person or the DJ that you want to listen to, or somehow stumble across it some other way. Whereas with YouTube, it's going to like feed that, you know, that mix or that video out to somebody that they think is going to like it. And so it definitely helps get that reach.
And the thing is too, since we're free, it's I do it all in my own time and it's free. And then I noticed, I was like, oh, SoundCloud and Mixcloud, you would have to pay, I think, for a specific type of accounts. So I'm like, well, it kind of defeats the purpose of, if I want to give this out for free, you know, for people to listen to it, to experience, I'm like, then it's like I have, I pretty much just pay for SoundCloud and Mixcloud. So I'm like, I'll just use YouTube. At first, it took a minute to kind of adjust, because every now and then I started, when I started uploading mixes, it's so funny because I've had to redo mixes. There's some mixes that I had to redo like 3 times to remove some certain songs. But that was in the beginning. Now it's like, I rarely get any kind of like copyright. When you upload it, it runs through the whole copyright thing. But most of the time, since most of the stuff I put on the mixes I play is just like a little more underground, it's not as like popular, and so I don't really get any kind of those copyright kind of flags or anything like that. Every now and then, but it's rare now. When I first started, I think there was a couple that just got they mute certain tracks or certain regions, or they'll turn certain things off. It won't display it. But it's all good. I think it's all part of learning and just kind of figuring out. But then, how I said, like when I started making more newer mixes, I was mostly a little more underground, so they really didn't even bother flagging any of it. So
Yeah. Well,
just kind
and
of rolled
YouTube
with
used
it.
to have like a lot more severe penalties if you did have like a copyright claim on your music, but now they're just like, okay, we're just gonna like not play it, like you said, like just not play it in this region
Yeah,
or
they
this
just
country or
mute it.
whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so I think that's one thing that listeners might be questioning is, or have questions about is like, okay, if I do post my mix on YouTube, am I going to get my channel shut down or anything like that? And
Yeah.
I think that nowadays they don't want to shut down your channel. They want to
Of course
they
not.
just want to protect people and the copyright owners, but also they want their
Right.
channel to stay open or stay up.
Yeah. It's kind of a twofold thing, because it's like if YouTube shuts your channel down, they don't monetize up the ads, right? And then it's like the artists, they get promoted and they get their stuff played. So it's definitely kind of a catch-22 in some cases. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, after a while, like YouTube, I just started learning a lot more of it. Since my wife is kind of into like social media marketing and a bunch of other stuff that she showed me some tips. So I started learning a lot of the YouTube kind of best practices and really improving on that, but also applying what I know in like design and branding to it as well. That really helped. And obviously the music too, the most important part is like, how do I bring that full circle? So I really, there was a kind of a learning curve, but after a while, I just kind of make sure that everything was done nicely. And you have your track listing, a little description, and just not too long ago, I started putting timestamps, the thumbnails,
Yeah,
and
nice.
the cover art. I try to really improve on that too. Every new series, we try to create a different vibe for each one, and just find tracks that really fit within that kind of vibe, and just mix it as dope as possible. How I said, the timing. Some mixes I recorded in like one take, and there's been a couple mixes that I've had to redo like 2-3 times and just get it right, but I always make sure I try to get the timing as perfect as possible. Cause with some tracks, most of the tracks that are produced are always, quantized as well, which helps. Cause, in the beginning you have your minute long kind of drum build, and then it jumps into the kind of the track itself, which is really cool. And then you have some tracks that are just like more of a album kind of style track, where it's just like drum start and it jumps right into the chorus or whatever the actual track is. So
Right.
yeah, and those tracks I try to like listen to it before, so I know where the timing is, and just try to get it right. But for the most part, when I mix a lot of the tracks, the DJs do all the work and the producers do all the work. I'm just like stitching it all together, So
Yeah. Which I would argue is like an art form in and of itself. I mean, at varying levels of sophistication and whatnot. So yeah.
yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the visuals on your channel. They're just like, you kind of alluded to this already, but they're just stunning. They're awesome.
Thank you.
And do you feel like the visuals have had? I mean, it's just a thumbnail, right? But do you feel like the visuals have had any impact into the success of
I
Rhythm
think
Republic
so.
so far?
I think so. Because I think we were talking about this earlier, where I think music and visuals or art kind of always play a huge part together. Because I think even back to how I said shopping at a record store, when you pull that album art, you're like, oh, I don't think you necessarily judge what the music is going to be like, but you have a notion of what you think it might be like.
Right.
Right. So, a lot of that stems from that experience of like actual tactile kind of like album experience. So, but a lot of it's influenced too from, I said, those late 90s, early 2000s compilations. Like, for example, I look at a lot of like the stuff from Large. They did like I think it was Rhythm Lounge and the Naked stuff, all the stuff from OM. Obviously their stuff was a little more funkier, which is cool because they, how I said, like they each have a very distinctive look and feel. And, that's how they differentiated themselves too. When let's say you were to go to Virgin and you see all the CDs at the top shelf, you would know, okay, like for example, Cafe Del Mar ones. I remember I used to see the ones at Virgin, and you see the girl standing, and it wasn't even like, it was really done very elegant. Like the girl, do you remember this one? It was like Cafe Del Mar. I don't know, it was like 5 or 6, where it's like the sunset and there's just the beach kind of shot. I was like, man, that stuff is really cool. So that really almost set the tone too for some of the music, because obviously Cafe Del Mar, they had the little more of the chill house and more down tempo, and a little sprinkles of the new jazz and the bossa stuff, bossa nova, and so I think a lot of the visuals play a huge part in the because I always said we want to create an experience. And how I said, I try to tie in to like the whole kind of global experience too, because my wife and I, we started traveling a lot, and I noticed we would go to some of these hotels and different lounges, and man, just like people would love house music, and even though they may not know it, but it's they walk through the hotel lobby or any of these, and you can hear it faintly in the background,
Right.
So I like to see, I like to, with the artwork that I do, the cover art, I want to try to, embody that experience too as well. But even though sometimes it gets a little challenging because, since I create a mix series and there's like 10 plus, so I have to source images, and sometimes I'm like, man, I should have done this better. But you know how it is. It's like I try to put stuff out at good quality, a really great quality, and I try not to be too much of a perfectionist, because then it's like you overthink it too much and not try to put it out. But sometimes it's like, I'll just put it out and see what happens, because there's some mix series that is more visual. And then there's some that I think that This Is Deep House was very simple, just like a speaker with the title, just very raw kind of, but most of them have visuals, but I try to just incorporate that, in everything. Because I always said that one of the things that inspired me from like Naked, we were talking about this earlier, was like, you look at their compilations, it was just like, it was super cool, man. They really put a lot of thought and effort into it as a full experience, not only just for the music, but the whole packaging and their branding. So it was really, really cool.
I don't know if this is true, but it almost seems like the packaging embodies the vibe of like the track, or like the whole
I think
mix
so.
of the tracks in the mix, or maybe it's the other way around.
I totally think so.
Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe we're just so used to like the kind of visual aesthetic of Naked Music that now we've associated with that with in our subconscious now. So now I don't know. It's all about branding, I guess.
And yeah, for sure. I think it definitely is. In some cases, and that's one of the things too that I really want to differentiate our channel from all the others. I'm sure you go to YouTube and you see all the Ibiza, the girls and the thumbnails and just the clickbaity stuff. I was like, man, I am not trying to do this. So a lot of if I want to do it, I'm going to do it right and do it in the proper kind of way, and then really pay homage to the traditional way that things, the traditional house music, but in a format that I would say it was like the late 90s, 2000s kind of like compilations that really inspired me and hopefully inspired a lot of others. I think it really, I think some folks also can sense that too in the channel. Sometimes they put comments, oh man, this reminds me of like the Stereo Sushi compilations. And essentially that's what I want, I want people to really kind of listen and be like, oh, this reminds me of this. And and it really kind of ties back into that, obviously the 90s, 2000s, golden era of just house music. So.
Right. I love it. So let's see. Do you feel like Rhythm Republic has any kind of a community? Like, is there
I think there is.
Yeah.
I think there definitely is, even now, because I started the Instagram account a little late. And I think that also there's folks out there that, send me, messages, comments. They're like, man, keep doing what you're doing. I love it.
Yeah.
And it's super cool, especially too on YouTube, the comments. A lot of people love it. People from Brazil, people from Europe, that are just, I think a lot of people are very music musical fans, people who are either, musicians or love music or have that musical ear, really enjoy the music, that I try to really just find as much of it as possible, and put it in a format that's consumable, that you can, okay, I'm gonna listen to these 10, 12 tracks all at once. So I definitely feel like there is. And
do you ever use the YouTube Premiere feature where you just kind of upload the mix and then like everybody is kind of can, like, I guess, click a box to listen to it at a certain time or whatever?
Yeah, I do the premieres all the time when I upload mixes. But it's weird because sometimes, like, I get people on the chat. Sometimes there isn't, or sometimes a little late. Like, because sometimes I'll premiere stuff at 6 a.m, which is already kind of like 8 and 9 East Coast time, depending. But then it's already, so it just depends too. But a lot of people, put comments, and which is really cool. And then I get also comments too from some of the producers on the tracks, and that's how I've made 2 connections with, I wouldn't say connections, but just kind of like, I reach out to some of the producers, they'll reach out to me and they'll send me some tracks and stuff like that. I just kind of create some kind of like a relationship, like for music and stuff like that. So acquaintance and stuff like that. So it's really cool, man. I think a lot of people, appreciate the channel, and which is really important to me, because then it's like, oh, I'm not just creating this stuff for nothing, but people really do appreciate it, which is really cool.
Well, I love it, and I would encourage listeners to check it out, Rhythm Republic on YouTube.
Thank you so much.
I'll be sure to include the links on the show notes, so that they can just link directly to your channel and get lost in the mixes, and because there's a lot out there, and they're all really good. So, yeah. What does Rhythm Republic look like 2 years from now or 3 years from now?
Oh, man, that's a good question. Well, I'm hoping eventually that it becomes something bigger than just a YouTube channel. I'm hoping, eventually I'm not really, I've gotten people, hey, why don't you do some live sets? I've tried it, maybe might do that. Eventually I want to create maybe possibly a brand out of it. I don't know really, but for me, the priority of it, or the most important thing, is just to put the dope music out there and find, producers and DJs who produce amazing stuff, and put it out there, consistently and at high quality. I think that's super important too, because, with mixes, I feel like there's a lot of pretty bad stuff on YouTube, where they just go to Track Source and download the top 40 stuff, which it isn't bad by any means. I'm not saying don't do that, but also I think there's a lot of ways to incorporate other tracks that maybe have maybe flown under the radar, or, how I said, those B-side remixes or those dubs that really don't get as much play. Those rare tracks. I really try to find a lot of that, and I find that everywhere. I literally just find it everywhere and make track lists out of it, and and just put it out there. Nice. I think, and the cool thing that I've found too is a lot of the producers and the DJs on the mixes, they're very receptive to it, and I always get comments. And the thing is too, it's like I don't monetize off of any of this. I don't none of it. I do this all because I love music, and I love DJing, the culture of it, and the history of house music too, because I think that's another important part of it that people need to know, is like these tracks, like they have some of these tracks have stood the test of time. They've been around since the 90s, and they're going to be around who knows how long, and I think the newer generation too, is kind of catching on to it, which is really cool to see as well. But they need to catch on to the good stuff, not too much of the,
look at their
stuff. So.
Right. This has been an amazing conversation. And I just want to encourage everyone to listen to the mixes and check out the channel and whatnot. Subscribe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony. Appreciate it.
Hey, friend, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As producers today, it can be really overwhelming to keep up with all the tasks that we need to complete. So I've created a free toolkit that can help you. I call it my release roadmap. This tool helps you to gain clarity on all of your tasks related to music production, demos, releases, and social media so that you can spend more mental energy on making music. Learn more about this free roadmap by visiting tonyfuel.com/roadmap or click the link in the description below. Again, that link is tonyfuel.com/roadmap. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.